text is Jeremiah chapter 12 and verse 5. If you have run with the footmen and they have wearied you, then how can you contend with horses? And if in the land of peace in which you trusted, they wearied you, how will you do in the floodplain of the Jordan? The first question that should come to your mind is, whose words are these? Who is speaking here? None other than the great I Am, the God of the universe. And these words, this question was directed to Jeremiah, a prophet of God. Next question. What led up to God putting this poignant question to this man of God? I'll tell you why. Jeremiah was fussing with God. He was fussing with God. Humbly and respectfully so, because he said in Jeremiah chapter 12 and verse 1, he said, "Righteous are you, O Lord, when I plead with you. You let me talk with you about your judgments." Then he comes with the big question. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why are those happy who deal so treacherously? Jeremiah was respectful and conscious of who he was dealing with, but stuff was bothering his mind. So he asks God, why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why are those happy who deal so treacherously? David, who wrote the Psalms, asked the same question at one point in his life. Jeremiah went even further to tell God, Lord, you planted them. That's why they are growing and prospering. What did this man mean when he said to God, Lord, these wicked people who are prospering, you planted them? Well, he looked at it this way. The wicked could enjoy no prosperity, no pleasure, unless God allowed it. You agree with that? So the fruit they enjoyed ultimately came from God in one way or another. So Jeremiah is saying, why are they prospering? And you are the one who planted them. I don't understand. And I'm thinking so far in this message, what's going on with this prophet? Well, I'm glad you asked. Jeremiah is smarting under the attack on his life. He is smarting. In Jeremiah chapter 11 and verse 21, the word of God tells us, the men of Anathoth said to him, if you come here prophesying in the name of the Lord, we will take you out. So get inside the story. Here is this man of God doing what God told him to do. And the men of the town or the village in which he lived say, you better not come here prophesying what you say God say to you to tell to us. If you do that, we're going to kill you. That's what's going on with Jeremiah. You know, it's one thing when you do something wrong and you get stick for it. But it's quite another thing when you are doing right and all hell seems to be breaking loose on your life. And then you too will go to God and say, Lord, what's up? If I'm doing wrong, I could understand, but when I'm trying to live for you, what's up? That's what Jeremiah was asking God. Why is the way of the wicked prospering? The people of Anathoth persecuted him. They mocked him. They laughed him to scorn when he came speaking for God. So Jeremiah experienced a sense of spiritual, mental, and emotional exertion from these villagers. So he questioned God regarding the prosperity of the wicked. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? And I'm thinking to myself, church, if David faced that puzzle and now Jeremiah asks the same question, no doubt you will face the same conundrum at some point in your life. No doubt some of you have already had the occasion to ask the same question as you agonized over the miscarriage of justice or the seeming misappropriation of blessings. I wonder if any of you have ever asked God, how come, Lord, how come she seemed to be enjoying the blessing of God? How come he seems to be enjoying the blessings of God? Why are the wicked prospering? Why am I striving to live right, living for God, and having a rough time in life? Some are not even here to ask the question or get the answer because they have left under the pressure of the inhabitants of Anathoth. They are not here to ask the question and get the answer because they got discouraged and left because they could not understand what God was doing or what he was not doing. Let's be honest. Sometimes we don't have a clue why God is allowing some things to happen. Don't have a clue. And just in case you are wondering, it is okay to question God. Hold it. Is that a right statement? Is it okay to question God? You're afraid to answer. I'm asking you, is it? You sure? It is okay to question God. It is okay to ask him why if you ask him in the right spirit and the right attitude. When we question God in our human ignorance, when we question God in our finite, limited knowledge, we better come before him fully conscious of who he is. The great God of the universe, the omniscient one who knows all things and therefore cannot make a mistake. So be careful with what attitude you come into his presence. The prophet Jeremiah, who knew who he was dealing with, so before he asked his elementary question, he declared, "Righteous are you, O Lord." In other words, who am I to question your judgment? But Lord, I am puzzled, so let me talk with you. That's quite different to why doesn't God do this? Or why isn't he doing this? Or how could God allow so many innocent children to starve to death? You see the attitude? I remember my wife, I always remember her. Wait till I finish what I'm saying. I remember my wife and I were trying to bring encouragement to a young lady going through some stuff. So we said to her, "Don't be discouraged. God will take care of you." She immediately retorted, "Well, he has done a lousy job so far." And when she said that, I almost looked up for the bolt of lightning. But none came. Thank God, as he said, he knows that we are dust. But be careful, church, be careful how you relate to the God of heaven. Oh yes, we know him as a loving Father to us, but at the same time, remember that holy angels veil their faces as they approach his presence. They genuflect when they utter his name. So when Jeremiah asks this question, why is the way of the wicked prospering? God did not give him an explanation of why the wicked seem to be prospering. Sometimes human beings behave as if God owes them an explanation. He is God. He doesn't answer to anyone. But if you love him and you serve him, he may give you a little understanding enough so that you could have faith in him. But I'm looking at this. So Jeremiah has asked this very puzzling question, this important question. And God did not give him an explanation of why the wicked was seeming to prosper. Possibly because he was asking a question that was out of his league. Possibly because if God would answer him, he won't get his head around it anyhow. There's only so much you can explain to a 5-year-old. That's a poor illustration of us before God. You try to explain the inside stuff of life to a 5-year-old. Can't get his head around it. But I think God didn't answer his question directly, because more so, God wanted to deal with Jeremiah's problem, which was why I am allowing you to go through what you are going through without rescuing you at every turn, which I can. Have I lost you, or are you still with me? I'm saying why the wicked was prospering wasn't really Jeremiah's question. What he really wanted to ask is, why are you not rescuing me at every turn? And I know you have the power to. And don't do as if that is only Jeremiah's question. You go through stuff too, and you pray, and then you want to know, why is not God coming to your rescue? I mean, if we'd have it our way, we wouldn't go through any stuff, because God will come to our rescue every time. And there are some Christians who believe when you serve God and you return a faithful tithe and you're in church every Sabbath, you'll go through no stuff. God never promised that. Never promised that. So he said to him in response. Remember, Jeremiah asked, why is the wicked prospering? Here's God's response. What did he say? If you have run with the footmen and they have wearied you, how can you contend with horses? And if you stumble in open country, how can you live in the jungle along the Jordan River? If in the time of peace, another translation, if in a time of peace they wearied you, then how will you do in the swelling of the Jordan? I don't know if you see it, but God was telling him in no uncertain terms. Listen to me now, because this is for somebody here today. He said, I am allowing you to go through what you are going through, to train you to stand up to much bigger stuff up ahead. If I rescue you from the small stuff now, you are going to freak out and buckle under the tougher stuff up ahead. And if you miss anything else, everything else in the sermon, don't miss that. Because God is telling you why he allows you to go through stuff and doesn't rescue you. He's training you for what he knows that you have to face up ahead. But let me go over that. If I rescue from the small stuff now, you are going to freak out or buckle under the tough stuff up ahead. And some of you would say, small stuff? You call what I'm going through small stuff? God says, I say small stuff, not to dismiss the hurt you feel, not to discount the pain you endure. I say small stuff, not to downplay the gut-wrenching fear you experience, but it's small stuff to what's up ahead. I'm telling you, God seems to be saying, whatever you are going through now, trust me, you are still running with the footmen. And hey, honey, you've got to be able to contend with horses. So I'm asking you, if you are running with footmen and they weary you, you ready to give up, you go under. How? Pray God, tell me, how will you contend with horses? God is saying, I'm getting you ready for Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1, where he says, at that time there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. God is getting you ready for that time of trouble. He says, I'm getting you ready for Matthew chapter 24 and verse 22. Except those days shall be shortened, no one will survive. I'm training you for those times that will allow you to go through stuff. I'm getting you ready for Revelation chapter 12 and verse 17, when the devil was enraged with the woman, that's the church, and went to do what, church? Went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and hold fast the testimony about Jesus. I'm getting you ready For when I release the four winds of strife, when I recall those mighty angels holding in check the demons of the earth, how will you stand then if ordinary human challenges wear you down? I would laugh if it wasn't so serious with the things that get Seventh-day Adventist Christians so discouraged that they stop coming to church. I'd laugh if it wasn't so serious. Somebody says something in the church about you, you stop coming to church. Please. Please. God said, I want you to strengthen yourself and get ready. Demons are going to be let loose on the earth. He says, I'm holding right now, no matter what we see on the earth, no matter how wicked, no matter how terrible, God is still holding in check, he says. He says one day he said to the angels holding in check the winds of earth, your work is done. Come back to heaven. He says a time of trouble will come upon this earth that no nation has ever seen, and my people will have to stand then. You better learn to run with horses. But I will come back to the idea of running with horses because I wanted to understand a little more of the second part of the question God put to Jeremiah. He asked him, if in a land of peace in which you trusted, they wearied you, how will you do in the floodplain of the Jordan? Another version says, if you stumble in open country, how can you live in the jungle along the Jordan River? Next version, if you can't even stand up in open fields, how will you manage in the jungle by the Jordan? There are two things of note mentioned here by different versions, and the two things are pregnant with meaning. One, the floodplain of the Jordan. And secondly, the jungle of the Jordan. You see the text mentioned those? These are contrasted to open country or open fields. So God is saying, on one hand, open fields, contrasted with the floodplains of the Jordan or the jungle of the Jordan. Keep that in mind. The floodplain or the jungle parallels the horses in the other statement. So he says, footmen, horses. So the floodplain, the Jordan, parallels the horses in the other statement. These are the situations or the circumstances or the challenges that the easier issues are getting you ready for. But you are floundering and flailing and fuming, just running with the footmen in open fields. God is letting you know that whatever you are facing now, the pain you endure, the challenges that you face, the foolishness that we live with, the trials that wear us down. He said, in comparison to what is to come, it's like walking in the park. It's like walking in open country. And you are stumbling all over the place. God is telling us that when his angels let loose the winds of strife, we will see a time of trouble such as the world has never yet seen. When the Spirit of God is withdrawn from the earth, then demons will have total control of the men who did not yield their minds to God. It's referred to as the swelling of the Jordan. What we are seeing now is just the smoke. The fire is behind. The floodplain of the Jordan, the swelling of the Jordan. Let me tell you about the swelling of the Jordan. High up in the mountains of the anti-Lebanon, a famous river was born, which was to play an important part in the history of God's people. From 4 different places in the mountain, this stream begins its journey. Then the 4 streams become one, and thus in a single channel, the river makes its way across the plain. As it meanders through the countryside, singing its tranquil song, children may wade in its shallow places, and timid wild animals may drink at its bank, and bright-colored birds may swoop low to play. But the Jordan wore a different face in the harvest after the rains came. It became a monster. It overflowed its banks. I'm a little behind here. Right, the Jordan had how many faces? It's like some people it's like some people in some other churches, not Beacon Light. It reminds me, this is a little extra. This is not in my sermon. A little child sat at a dinner table on Sabbath, and she was listening there. Children taking everything. She was listening, members of this church. Thank God it wasn't Beacon Light. This child was listening to these members, these members, her mom and another sister from the church, having a sister from church for lunch. So one of the things they said for this little girl to hear was, Sister Janet, she has 2 faces. The child said, Half an hour later, Sister Janet turned up. When the child heard that it was Sister Janet, she ran to the door, through the door, man, looked up in Sister Janet's face, and she says, Mommy, but Sister Janet doesn't have 2 faces. They didn't know where to hide their faces. But I'm saying, the Jordan had 2 faces. One when the weather was good and after the rains came. It overflowed its banks and raged and roared and rumbled, taking everything in its path. I studied this thing. It said when it flooded its banks, it drove the lions and other beasts of prey from the coverts among the bushes that lined its bank. And these lions spread terrible havoc by slaying men and carrying off livestock. So the swelling of the Jordan came to represent extreme danger. How? Pray God, tell me how. If you scream and stutter and stumble and shamble in the open fields, how will you survive when the Jordan overflows its banks? If in a land of peace, they weary you. How will you do in the swelling of the Jordan? Then God re-emphasized the message just in case the first imagery went over your head. You have run with the footmen and they have wearied you. How can you contend with the horses? Historically, the footmen could have been referring to the Philistines and the Edomites. These armies principally fought with infantry, foot soldiers. But the Chaldeans had an abundance of cavalry and chariots. The swelling of the Jordan, or the horses, the ravages referred to, came to represent the ravages of war and hostile invasions. The Bible usually represents that kind of invasion under the image of a river rising rapidly above its banks and carrying away everything in its path. Remember, God doesn't exaggerate. So if he says to you, get ready to run with horses, then be assured you will have to run with horses one day. Doesn't exaggerate. And sure enough, as I checked the history, Jeremiah, who was complaining about these folk, his villagers, giving him trouble and wondering why God wasn't intervening, and thought that he was going through hell, surely he had to run with horses later on. Because I found in Jeremiah chapter 20, verses 1 to 3, that Jeremiah had to face a night in the stocks, where they've just put you in jail, but buckled you down hand and feet to wooden stocks, where you couldn't move very well and you would cramp up during the night. You had to spend a night in stocks. I also found in Jeremiah chapter 38 and verse 6, where he had to face confinement in a cistern. Could you imagine it dropping you down in a cistern? And then over in Jeremiah chapter 28 and verse 13, Jeremiah entered the dungeon and the cells, and Jeremiah had remained there many days. And the Bible says that when they dropped him in this dungeon, there was no water but mire, and Jeremiah sunk in the mire. God was getting him ready for this stuff. So God says, get ready to run with horses. Very significant statement. God never calls us to contend with horsemen until he has trained us by the lesser strain of contending with footmen. But you see, when you complain and when he's trying to train you to run with the footmen and give you the training, and you complain and then you turn your back on him and walk away and leave him, then you're going to face the time of the horsemen alone. He never calls you to contend with horsemen until he has trained us by the lesser strain of contending with footmen. Hey, I don't know about you, but I want to take God's training now so I could stand up later on. How will you contend with horses We have established that the most likely is referring to horsemen. When you say horsemen, most likely is a cavalry of the enemy then. But you know, I like to delve, and I said to myself, okay, but suppose God meant exactly what he said. What did he say? You run with men and get entirely exhausted. How will you do when you have to run with horses? And I'm thinking to myself, how can you even put running with men and running with horses in the same sentence? I wanted to explore that, and I came away astonished, as one usually does when you dig into scripture. I discovered that a trained runner can indeed outrun a horse. You doubt me? Some of you are doubting me right now. Please, Pastor. Well, you should know by now not to doubt me when I'm in the pulpit. I was astonished to discover that a trained runner can indeed outrun a horse. Okay, all right. Let me help you. Let me help you. Can a man run with horses? A trained runner can outrun a horse. The fastest man alive, they say, maybe somebody has beaten him already, I think. The fastest man alive, Usain Bolt, ran 100 meters in 9.58 seconds. Well, a cheetah did it in 5.95 seconds. When it comes to speed, human beings will come last. Did you hear what I say? When it comes to speed, even a bird can outrun a man with speed. The ostrich. Well, don't feel bad. An ostrich can outrun a horse, actually. But you see, if the man there is Usain Bolt, could you imagine? He can't even run as fast as what's the first animal there? A cat. He can't even run as fast as a dog. You have the horse and the ostrich and, of course, the fastest animal, the cheetah. So when it comes to speed, we will come last. But now comes the surprise. No one can beat us when it comes to stamina. Listen to me carefully. A trained runner would eventually outrun a horse. We can run much longer than anything else. On a hot day, a trained runner can outrun a horse in a 26.2-mile marathon. One of the main reasons I discovered is that we stay cool by sweating rather than panting. We can stay cool at speeds and distances that would overheat other animals. So the animals are much swifter and faster than we are, but a trained runner will eventually outrun a horse. We have a great cooling system and also the advantage of having very little hair on our bodies. So, we will win the race if we stick with it. So the message is, stay with it. When the way gets rough, stay with it. When the boat starts to shake as if it is going under, I speak of the church, stay with it. When it seems like all kinds of animals are on the ark of safety, stay with it. We are built for long distances if we stay close to the trainer. He will take you through the paces. He will stretch you and test you. He will pull you and prod you. He will stick with you and strengthen you. All this getting you ready for the swelling of the Jordan. All this to enable you to run with horses when the time comes. If you run with the footmen and they have wearied you, how can you contend with horses? And if in the land of peace they wearied you, then how will you do in the swelling of the Jordan? No wonder Jesus said in Luke chapter 9 and verse 62. What book did I say? Luke chapter 9 and verse 62. No one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of heaven. Did you hear that? Matthew 24:13. The person who endures to the end will be saved. He who does what? Endures to the end. You've got to stick with it. You can't give up. You can't turn back. You can't, after all this time with God, get discouraged and turn your back on him. He who puts his hand to the plow and turns back is not fit for the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus is not telling us to do something that he didn't do himself. He says the race is not for the swift, but he who endures to the end. Jesus went through the swelling of the Jordan. Jesus, our Savior, an example, had to face the swelling of the Jordan. He had to endure the storm clouds. And man, did he fight through some stuff. In the Garden of Gethsemane, when he fell to the ground, clutching the earth for support, and blood stood on his forehead like sweat. Did he endure the swelling of the Jordan when at Calvary the satanic cavalry rode in and all the demons of hell zeroed in to make him fail the test and give up? To sin, the devil said, his satanic majesty said to all his imps, I don't care what you have to do. He must not go through with this and win. Make him sin, even by a thought. And so they released the pressure. We will never understand what Jesus went through on that cross. All the demons of hell. But thank God that though evil seemed to be triumphing that day, and the wicked seemed to be prospering, amid the storm and the blood and the evil of that day, the greatest battle was won. The battle was won when Christ said, hey, it's finished. It's finished. And human ear might have misunderstood the statement and thought that he was giving up, What did he mean it's finished? Great transaction is done. I made it to the end. I did it. It's finished. The battle was won that would one day put us back in the kingdom. But between here and now, God is training us to run with horses. That's why you go through stuff. That's why sometimes you have to ask him, Lord, why is evil prospering? Why are the enemies of God seem to be doing better than me? You ask that question. Why am I going through this pain? Why am I going through this hardship when I'm trying to serve you? Why is it that sometimes you feel like my prayers are just not going beyond the ceiling and you're not coming through, and I'm on my bed of affliction and I'm calling on you and I'm having faith in you and nothing seems to be happening? Why evil seems to be prospering? And God says, you're still running with the footmen. You're still running with the footmen. I'm training you, my son. I'm training you, my daughter, for when all hell is let loose on this earth. But he says, whether footmen or horses, he says, there is one thing to remember. God, I'm telling you this, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Even when you feel I'm not there, I'm there. Even Jesus Christ on the cross, under the pressure, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Did God forsake him? God was right there in the background watching. He had to allow him to go through that. Was it worth it all at the end? When he burst that tomb on the Easter morning with all power over death in his hand, it was worth the suffering. No matter what you are called to go through on this earth, one day you will look back and it will look like a walk in the park. When you see what God is giving you, when you see what God is handing you, when you see the beauties of the new earth and the glories, when you feel invigorated and find that you are immortal, every vestige of disease gone, and you are young again and strong again, and you will never more be sick or be in pain or die. Then you look back. The servant of God says, when some of the saints who have gone, who had died before and didn't go through the time of trouble, they will come up to us and say, wow, you went through the time of trouble. What did you have to go through? And she said, we will try to remember the most difficult thing that we had to go through. And she said, all we'll be able to say is, heaven is cheap enough. It would be like a walk in the park when we look back. But now it feels like we are going through hell itself. Hold on, my brother. Hold on, my sister. Why does the wicked prosper? God says, you are running with footmen and you are getting weary. God could give you the strength to face the footmen and to run with horses. Our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed. I'm not talking to those who are super successful and making it. I'm talking to the other human beings. Those who today in this service want to say, Pastor, pray for me. Because at times, I felt like God wasn't listening to me.